All right, before the break, we went over that kind of stuff, the protocols, the using, talk briefly about what HTML is and an active subject we learned by doing. So that's kind of the starting point, and now we're ready to start doing things. Pretty much the rest of the semester is going to be example based. Periodically pause the screen share, step away from the example to draw diagrams on the board, make sure it's understand what's going on with it and stuff. But there's not as much of that in this class as there is in the other programming classes. For those who've had me before. For those who had me before, the note I'm getting ready to make on the board is something you've definitely heard me say before. You've had me in other classes, and something I'm going to ask for with final project. Remember, there is a big final project. Preparing your proposal for that next week, where you're going to make a website full of static pages. You'll deliver something, deliver a bunch of graphics and text. It's not going to change, so informational. You'll want to pick a topic that's due next week. And something I always ask for in the proposals involves planning. I will very quickly agree that anything that fits in the time constraints of a classroom can be made without a plan. We're under tight time constraints here. But this is a learning environment. You don't want to learn to make a plan when you need a plan. Because the converse of that, a couple ways to say converse, but the converse of that would be that anything that fits in our time constraints will be really easy to make a plan for. So you get good practice at making plans, especially two important numbers. Is when you make a project proposal, for your final project, ask you to go find a template for a standard template for project proposal, fill that out and do it thoroughly and kind of set up a plan. We'll only do a couple here in class because it's fairly easy, but there's two really important numbers you're going to want to get some practice on. And so our project plan for today, summary, going to be a quick HTML, CSS example. Quick HTML, CSS example with links. We have at least 2 pages. I guess I can put that in there. At least 2 pages. That way it's a site, not a page. There's some other stuff given in the project proposal. When you download a template, you'll see all the stuff there. We'll talk about that next week when that's going to be part of the weekly assignments. And there's going to be 2 lines on there that do not matter in the least bit for a classroom. They're as trivial as can be in the classroom, but that's timeline and budget. This is a classroom, so our timeline here is by 3:15, and our budget is 0. As trivial as can be, but the thing is, in the real world, those are the only 2 lines people care about. You better have the whole big nice proposal. You better have a 20-minute speech to give along with it. But the only 2 things they care about is how much does it cost and when do they get it. And so being good at predicting those 2 numbers will definitely pay off for you. And there's different ways. Some people just go high every time. And then it comes in early and under budget. If you do that a lot, people are going to notice that you're not very good at predicting stuff. You want to be actually good at predicting it, right? It's better to consistently deliver when you said it's going to be delivered for the price you said it was going to cost. People take notice of that. And the only way to get good at those is just practice. So break it down. So, and just make up numbers. We have a different color here. So set it by 3:15. I'm going to say 20 minutes on HTML,
10 minutes on CSS, 5 minutes to test, debug, 5 minutes to upload, deploy, that's a good word for it, to deploy site. So actually get it over there on the domain where anybody with internet access can see it. And then maybe 5 more minutes to test and debug. Because I pulled out the Windows PCs and that's a Linux server it's going to, so there are slight differences that might show up. So break your timeline down like that. And at the end, we'll make a comparison. Or along the way, we'll make a comparison and see how far how close or far off we are. And then on the next one, you can take a better guess at that. You can take a better guess at how long it's gonna take, and a better guess. Get better and better and better at estimating that. For long, when you use, it would just be wrong to use the word guess on. And then when you can accurately predict those things, the people your paycheck depends on will take notice of that quickly. Managers, clients, everybody's going to notice that you're really good at telling them in advance when they're going to get it and how much it's going to cost when it comes in. So I did it. So 45 minutes on the list, they $75 an hour. So 45 minutes times $75 per hour. Which is sort of the wrong format. 3/4 of an hour times $75 per hour is what it should cost. What is that? Probably could have thought ahead and hit some better numbers, but we don't have to do the math in our heads anymore, right? So 75 times 3/4 is 225 and a quarter. Oh, 225 quarters or 56.25. So in the classroom, there's not going to be money exchanged. This is always our budget. The timeline's due date or at the absolute longest end of semester. Trivial as can be, but practice those. Just take a couple minutes, jot down how long you think it's going to take, make up some numbers to go with that. Different things you can base out in an accounting class, you know how to break down cost of equipment and hourly, or get project management class. You've seen some of that, how to distribute resources. And get practice at that, because that is a very, very important skill to get good at. And I just said everything I could say about that. Everything else about getting good on that is just you practicing. But it only takes a few minutes, at most a couple minutes at the beginning of all your projects. I think you get really, really good at it, and it will show. Clients will remember that, recommend you to more people. So your clientele grows quickly. Managers will remember that come yearly review time and end up with the base raise in the department. All sorts of good stuff can come out of just that couple extra minutes, putting that in when you do it. Some sort of plan will also include a rough version of what the site's going to look like. So a couple common ones might have a wireframe. So this will make more sense when we get to like the design chapter, where we actually look at some of the core elements of graphic design, the core concepts there. But this is used to visualize the white space on the page. How does the content compare to the white space? How's it lay out? Our page is only going to have a couple paragraphs on the first page, maybe one paragraph on the second page. Another very popular one is storyboard, where we start combining that. Maybe like this could be a header. Like there's some big black text up there. So we would draw a big thick line, and then we have a thin line under it. We can compare, get the general idea of how it sits next to the white space. We'll talk about graphic design concepts, visual communication concepts in a couple weeks. Next to the paragraph, the other one just has a paragraph to say we're on the second page because we're talking about stuff and examples are starting off slow. The examples will get faster as we progress through this semester. A storyboard has more details. So maybe I'll color code this. So up at the top, we have this blue section that's a level 2 heading. So big bold text, but not the biggest, boldest text. And then right below that, we'll have a small paragraph. The page, it's going to have a paragraph on it. And there's not much to see on this example, but notice how the storyboard has just a little bit more information than the wireframe. This one just has a paragraph. We'll see things like that. I guess inside of the paragraph, we need a link to get to our other page. Sure made that blue. You don't know what color the link is. I'm gonna write A, and we'll talk about why it's A when we get to it. I guess I can say it now. It stands for anchor. But I could draw that like an anchor. The pages are anchored to each other. So that's how we make our links. One of the primary ways. And then some colors. So the red and blue, I guess the green here are how we're going to color it. Just to introduce CSS. First thing of that. And oftentimes I like to combine these two. I'll be a little more cautious when I put the storyboard together and see how the colors lay out on the page and try to get the correct positions and sizes so they get wireframe information and storyboard information. I usually think of it as a wireframe with colors and labels, but they combine nicely into one document. It's a good thing to get practice with. But that'll be a couple pages to get us started with. And then this one, we'll do that a couple times this semester. I'll ask for it on your project proposal. You have to do it at least once, but it will definitely be worth your time. And there's not much else I can say about it. It just practice that. And every time you do something, try to get better at estimating how long it's going to take. Usually the price is based off how long it's going to take. So go in here and all text-based, so we need text editor. Was everybody able to choose some sort of text editor to use? And try different ones because they all have different functionality, lots of different options, lots and lots and lots of different options out there. And I'm guessing some of y'all probably chose VS Code for your text editor. VS Code is actually a text editor framework. So that's the default version of a whole bunch of programming libraries that were designed so that a programmer could make the exact text editor they wanted for a project in an hour. So as you progress through school, it might be worth it to try to, if you use VS Code, to actually go to the Electron framework and give that a try. Customize your text editor for the project you're going to be working on. They definitely have the best ad campaign ever because we don't have commercial text editors, right? I do those roundabout things. And what Microsoft came up with was whenever their programmers on salary have downtime, they're supposed to make YouTube tutorials. And along the way of that tutorial, talk about how great VS Code is for it, which advertises their product And for the rest of us, we get lots and lots and lots and lots of tutorials from some of the best programmers in the world. So it's a really great, it's still an ad campaign, but really great ads. So we need to create our page here, and it can be done with predictive text. I'm gonna type the whole thing out on the first one. I'll use the predictive text that I have in Sublime. That's another thing to look at is what do you get from the predictive text boxes? Some type it out the first time to remind you all of all this stuff. Very first thing is we have to say what type of data we have. That .html extension that we're going to give our file, that only tells our local machine is HTML file, and we can put that on anything we want. Right? HTML are letters off our keyboard. We need something that specifically tells a CPU this is the type of data you're looking at. So that's our doc type declaration. So exclamation mark, doc type, and then HTML5 is just HTML. Before HTML5, that was a URL that went to someplace that knew a bunch of the tags that the computer needed to process. But it's with the standardization, there's only one place the computer needs to look for. It's standardized, so all the browsers know it. All the browsers know what the tag should be. I'm gonna go ahead and save this so it changes colors. I would delete folder, but there's gonna be at least 2 pages here, right? From the picture I drew, it's gonna be at least 2 pages, so we probably want to organize that into a folder to begin with. Then we can upload the whole folder to the domain host at the end. I'm gonna call it Hello World, just to avoid calling it class example specifically. Oh, that's actually a bad name. So this is how programmers would name that, right? Using that underscore. But this folder will need access from the address bar in a browser. And people who are programmers don't use underscores. So when we talk about search engine optimization, that's one of the things. If you have underscores in a URL, it will actually, like Google bots will actually rank you lower because that's not as good of an address. So really we want to use dashes here. We click on that and rename it. There it goes. So hello dash world, which is what you're all probably used to seeing from typing in web addresses anyway, right? And the first one, I want to go in that folder and automatically open one of the pages. I could give it a name, but anybody typing the address would have to type that address in. So I'm going to call the first one index.html. And you might remember that the domain host already has an index.html. It doesn't hurt to put an index HTML file in every single folder. And that way all you need is the folder name to get to that particular segment. We'll see different ways to do it, to addressing things. Then we have an HTML tag. And a couple lines down, we want to end that HTML tag. And I consistently work that way. The final result needs to go left to right, top to bottom in a certain order. That's not necessarily the way we think about it. And just about every time we open a tag, we have to close a tag. So I've found it productively to kind of better over the years to go ahead and do that immediately to avoid forgetting it, and then come back and fill in the middle. So you'll see that a lot in our examples this semester, jumping around and putting it together, not necessarily left to right, top to bottom, the way we would write an English essay. Do what works best in your mind. And right now I'm still typing things that are going to be predicted every time. So we also have a head section, and that's where we put like metadata, things about the site, put a description, the search bots can summarize when it shows up on HTML, what to do for different viewport sizes, where to find the style sheets. There's plural. We can put more than one style sheet in there. And title class example 2. But the only thing we put in the head section that actually is visible to the end user is the title tag. And that's what goes into the little text. Oh, there's also a fave icon. We'll see that in next week, I think. Maybe. Yeah, next week. In week 3, we'll see the fave icon. So the title and then the little picture that goes in the tab as well. Everything else is background information. We'll come back and for our example today, we'll tell it where to find a style sheet. And I'll come down and set up a body element. So each particular one is the tag, and then from the opening club tag to the closing tag is the element. That's, we kind of want to think of it that way. So the object. If you've seen some object-oriented programming, we have the body object, and we're going to put a bunch of stuff inside that body object. In particular, some words. So going back to the storyboard or the wireframe here, it looks, there's a heading section up top. We have head, header, and heading. So make sure you get used to distinguishing between those, because a lot of your instructions for your homework assignments will spell it out in English. So make sure you know the difference between the head, heading, and header. Header is a container. We'll see that Wednesday. It's one of our semantic containers, like header, footer, the section of the page. There's also heading, which goes back all the way to the beginning. So that's like H2, a level 2 heading. I'll go ahead and pull that. We'll put in the closing tag and put in some words here. I don't know, I'll do a trivial example because the data for this isn't important. The tags on this one. And the first look at how the tags go together is. And then we'll follow that with a paragraph tag. Or let's look at the official reference real quick. Like, okay, now that's the heading. How do we do regular text? So there's a lot of references. There is an official one because HTML5 is a standard. I think we're in 5.1 now. Or no, we're in 5.2. And 5.3 is in the works. But eventually there's going to be a HTML6. When we get to HTML6, that's when that doc type declaration is going to be changed. That's the big difference. Anything HTML 5 point something is officially a standard. So there's a site, w3schools.com. w3schools.com. The standard is set by the World Wide Web Authority, so W3, and they have this official one. And right here is references, so we can go to HTML reference, HTML tag reference. And you can see there's lots and lots of different tags. Oh, here we are. So that one's on the board. That's our anchor tag, the basic list. We'll talk about what all that's doing in a second. Those are the list here. A abbreviation. That one is incredibly useful. You probably wouldn't realize it by the abbreviation, but we'll see that about week 7. Some of the really useful things we can get out of that. Let's scroll down, and this is the official reference site. And when you click on one, like LI, our textbook this semester, the author loves list. If you start reading the textbook, you probably noticed that. The author absolutely loves list. When I took a class like this, lists were never mentioned. They didn't make the cut for the textbook. So it is personal style. There's different ways we can put these things together. The author of our textbook, we're using for the class, absolutely loves lists. He wants to do lists for everything. But yeah, when I took a class like this, list did not show up. They didn't make the cut. It's tables and block quotes. But on the reference site, they'll have information about it, show what browsers it's going to work on. You can look through that, see what it is. Some description about the attributes we have. We'll see attributes probably today. And there's also a text editor built right here. So you can see what it looks like when it runs, make changes. And just make little adjustments. So the official reference site has all of that. I'm going for paragraph. So what are the basic P is the paragraph text, paragraph tag. In the late 80s, early 90s, printing was a precious commodity. So everything from back then, all the original stuff is abbreviated. And it really makes the new stuff stand out because it's all spelled out. But P for paragraph is our just generic text that we still have control over. Because we could put just text here, but we wouldn't have any control over it because there's no way for the computer to identify that text. The HTML, making it an HTML element, for those who have had object-oriented programming, turns it into an object we can do stuff with. So I'll add in paragraph. This is our first real example with a link to another page. And we'll come back and put the link in there in a moment. But again, that open and closing tag surrounding all of our data. And that together makes an element, which essentially becomes an object. We can do stuff with it. We could put text on there without the tags, but then it's text on the website and we can't ask the computer to identify that text uniquely. There's always one programming. It's a good idea to run a test every chance you get. So we got something there, so we can go run a test. We can run a documents folder, and I have this delete folder where I do all the little scratch folder. I do all the work in, and then either move stuff someplace important or empty it at the end of the week. And the computer, since I gave it the HTML extension, the local computer knows that's a file that opens with the browser. We just double click on it, it should open up. We have some control. View page source, you can look at what it is. Or if you right click and inspect, I think on Edge you have to give it permission to get to the inspector panel, but there's lots and lots of debugging tools. First time you do it, go to the inspector panel and give it permission, and then click it again, and then you'll see debugging tools like this. There's it's called the cover or the body, things highlights. I can tell where that's at. Those colors mean something. We'll talk about soon. Padding and borders and padding and borders and margins are color coded there. However, each particular element can see different things about it. Or if I click on H2, we haven't got to styles yet, but there's the default style rules for this. We have all sorts of lots and lots of debugging tools built right into all the browsers. And I'm just going to leave this open, and then when we make changes, come back and reload it. Because, well, like the picture shows, we need a second page, right? So this one I'm going to use the predictive text. So I'll use the mouse so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to hit new file, and I'm going to go ahead and hit save and save it as an HTML page. I already used index, so just any name. I'll call it other-page.html. So I just typed letters HT. The computer knows it's HTML, so it can start doing the color coding and predicting which ones to do. On the Sublime text editor, I just typed HT. No little list popping up. If I hit the tab key, then I get all that default stuff. Plus a little bit more than we saw on the previous one. So there's the doc type, opening HTML tag, and then in the head, we start to get some metadata. So in particular, it explicitly says this uses Unicode encoding. We're sending a bunch of text data with Unicode encoding. The viewport, we don't really have to do this anymore. This was because of Apple devices, but for some reason we had to
specifically say to use the entire viewport every time. And there's some other places where that has to show up, and set it at a scale of 100%. But there was a good little stretch where we had to do that for our Apple devices would not display it correctly. If we didn't explicitly say to use the width of the device, device width is the, yeah, it's really strange. Always struck me as strange to have to say, use the whole screen. Don't use half of the browser window to put our page, use the whole browser window. But Apple did finally update that. We got all that from the predictive text. And a lot of text editors will do that every time. And otherwise, it's not hard at all to type that first part, that boilerplate code that's always going to be the same, and just save that as like template.html. So then every time you start a new one, open that template and save it with a different name. Or a lot of text editors might correctly have a template, so you can do 2 or 3 different versions. Actually, most of your text editors should have a template. Template functionality somewhere. And now we're ready to, I guess, copy over the title tag, because that one's not quite boilerplate code. As far as the boilerplate code knows, we know there's going to be a title tag. We don't know what's going to be in there. So let's copy and paste that from the other one. That way it's consistent for the site. And I'm going to turn off word wrap, because writing code with word wrap on is kind of strange. We can scroll to the right and see all that stuff. Gives us a better indication of where that's at. Notice how there's no closing tag for this one, though. Every time they've updated the standard, every time they've updated, way before it was standard in HTML5, so at least back to 30, every time they do the update, they try to add in there a slash here. So standalone tags have to have that. Most of our other markup languages do have that. Every time they've tried to update HTML, at least back to 3, they've tried to add that in and then dropped it at the last minute because that'll destroy backward compatibility. But eventually they might find a way to add it in. And adding it in later is kind of odd. And most of our other markup languages of this form do require that slash. So anytime you do a standalone tag in here, I'm going to ask, please go ahead and put that slash here. Because the people that set the standard want it there, they just haven't been able to. They've always dropped it at the very, it's like the very last thing dropped a day or 2 before the new standard is released. And some of the other ones, in particular, XML does require that for standard. So it'll be worth your practice to get used to putting that there. But if you leave it all, I think the textbook always leaves it all. It obviously is not going to crash. Then we can put some words here. So that the paragraph tag, because when I start typing the tag, all these tag names come up. And I have it turned off in the predictive text here in Sublime. I could set that so that it also goes to the W3 consortium, since that's the official reference site, and downloads the documentation so that there'd be a whole paragraph there to explain all that. Things are linked together in our world. We're going on to P. There's a bunch that start with P, but when I hit tab, I automatically get that closing, finishes the opening tag, puts in the closing tag, and the cursor in the middle. Most text editors should behave that way. But again, I would recommend trying different ones. Right? When you way through school, try different ones, see what you like, see what features you like, what features you don't like. Different things. The reason I went with Sublime is because it behaves exactly the same on every system. So it doesn't matter if I pull up my PC, a Chromebook, and MacBook, that this text editor is going to behave exactly the same on all of them. Whereas some text editors will be different if you switch to a different system. And I do that a lot. Instead of multiple screens, I use multiple computers. For those that haven't had me before. So
I'm constantly switching back and forth between systems. Because multiple computers get expensive, so I don't have several PCs. I'm using, it'll be like the PC and the Mac, or the PC and the Chromebook and the Mac. I only have one of each system. It's expensive enough just to do that. Let's see, this is the second page in our first real example. And it will link back to the first page. I'm turning Word right back on. Another thing, make sure you know how to toggle word wrap on and off on your machine. Because with tech, when writing code, it starts to get strange when we separate different lines and we lose track of our indents and all that, all the stuff we did to make it look nice. So we usually want to write one line in one line. But if we need to like go back and preview this sentence, check grammar in that sentence, it's a lot easier if it fits on the screen all at once. So you want to make sure and turn word wrap on and off. That's the one thing I don't like about Sublime is it's not on a keyboard shortcut. Or by default, I just go into preferences and settings, and Sublime uses JSON, so I can just write, not settings, I go to key bindings and set a key binding to do that. These things are customizable. If you're in this class, you're a programmer. We don't work with we don't adjust our stuff to the software. We're the ones that tell the machine what to do. Sometimes it just takes a minute, but that's another thing with the text editor is make sure you know how to customize. If there's not a keyboard shortcut there by default on something you're going to do a lot of, like toggle word wrap on and off, probably want to put a keyboard shortcut to that. This is taking our page. It will link back to the first page. That looks like a good paragraph. I'm not typing right now, so I'll just leave that on there and go preview the page. Come back over here. The index page is still open. So I reload it. Don't have a way to get to the other page yet. Well, except the address bar. I can go up to the address bar and type in the name. Although I already forgot what I called it. Other page.html. So once I look at the name, then I can go up here, other page.html. It looks good, but not. There's not a direct route back to the previous page. I guess at this point I can just use the back button to get back there. Kind of matches our wireframe, but not our storyboard yet. It actually shows the link. So let's look at that real quick. And like the picture I drew earlier, we anchor the pages together. Attach anchors to link, connect them. We just use link. So we'll wrap an A tag around this, which I'm not going to do. Use the predictive text because the text was already there. Some text editors could use the predictive text. Let me see if it. So if I highlight what I want to, so I'll say link to another. Oh no. Sublime will, some of them you can highlight text and then it'll fill things in, but that works a lot better with parentheses and stuff. And so if it's HTML, some of them will even do it on your tags, on the tags. So try that, and I guess as always, make sure you know where the undo button is. Usually Control Z, one of the most useful keyboard shortcuts there is. Actually, before I save this, I'm going to come over here, hit reload, and nothing happens. Because that's something that's going to happen a lot, right? For those who haven't had me in class before, I like to make the mistakes here and show how to fix them instead of just trying to say to avoid them, because that doesn't happen. We're going to forget to save sometimes. So when you notice there's no changes and you know you made a change and you cleared the cache and all of that, because browsers remember when they've already looked at a page before. Excuse me. That's going to show up a lot for us because the browser remembers when it's looked at HTML code before. But it doesn't pay attention to CSS. So when we're debugging things, we make a change in CSS and the HTML is still exactly like it was. The browser is going to remember it already looked at that and show us the old version instead of loading in the new one.
It's kind of an important thing because then, well, transferring across the network is a lot quicker if we pull it from the local machine instead of somewhere else in the world. But when we're like trying to test CSS, it can be a little annoying at times. Why'd that link not show up? Did I save it? Oh, I was expecting a color there, but maybe the color doesn't show up. It's gonna show up for a second. Okay. And I was expecting it to change colors, but probably didn't update it. And just that an anchor is not enough. We have to anchor to something. There are two ways we can pull in other files. We can use a hyperlink reference or a source. So the times we would need one or the other, we need to source it if we need the whole thing every time in the same order. If we need that data, if we need every bit of it every time in the same order, then we want to source it. Picture would be an example of that. If we brought in the middle third of a ping image, we don't have our picture. We need the whole picture every time, and we need that data in the same order because that's what defines the picture. So we would source that. We also hyperlink reference. That's when we just need parts of it or might not need it at all. So for links, we typically use hyperlink reference because we might not need that data at all. That's up to the user. That's back to that core concept of hypertext transfer protocol. Here's where you get the other page. Click it if you want. And that goes back to 1990, so it's abbreviated. Hyperlink reference is href. Href is, and then the address of where the other page is. I put them in the same folder, so that's the first place it's going to look. First place it's going to look is to see if it's in the same directory. And if it is, then all we need is the file name. So hyperlink reference to other page.html. And now when I reload it, well, already turned purple, but we get the color change and underline it, and you all know what next is like. Link to another page, the second page. Still have to use background, so we can put a link in the other one to get back and forth between them. Back over to the text editor. An anchor tag with a hyperlink reference going to index.html. I'll do it like this first. Save that, or it's programming, so most often you're going to want to have every file for the project open and use the save all button. Always remember to save all, because it's really easy if we're jumping back and forth between files to forget to save one or the other. So save everything, reload the index page, and we link to the other page, we get that, link back, we go to that. Another thing that can be used in addressing, but we're not on the domain host yet, but if the user just types that in the address bar, they're going to get that HTML page. Here locally, it's going to show no matter what. But then when we link back to it, that would start showing in the address bar. You're going to be like, might see that name and expect just the domain name. So one shortcut that can be useful, but this is going to work here, this might not work on my local machine. Dot, just a dot, refers to the current directory. One of the buttons when we get to the domain host is just dot. And that's how we go up a level. Dot for the current directory and then dot for the level above it. I reload that if I go over to the other page and link back. Oh, it didn't work on my local machine. That would work on a Linux server. I usually avoid doing that. Oftentimes I'll create a second file, a copy of the index that's called home. And that way, if people go back to that, they get to see the home page when they go back in the address bar. Different ways to work around it.
the dot didn't work on the Windows machine, but it would work on the Linux machine. And notice it didn't know where to go, so it just showed me the directory structure. And Linux machines are the same way. So by default, if it can't find the starting point, like if you don't create the index file, it will just show you the directory structure. So you basically get a table of contents. Okay, I'm gonna not do that because it's not cross-platform. That will work on Linux, but not on. Go right here. So we link between the two pages. That's step one. We're going to do a whole lot of HTML. We have a whole bunch of tags to see and alternative uses for them. Kind of like that one I paused and pointed at. It said ABDR is the tag for abbreviation. We will see some actual usefulness in that at the end of the semester when we get to odds and ends. It usually falls in the same day we do math with HTML, which is an odd thing. There's a technicality that any way we have to feed into instructions into a machine can be used to feed in any instruction that machine accepts. Just sometimes it's just completely unfeasible and unrealistic. So around week 6 or 7, when we're getting into just odds and ends and things that are useful, we'll look at how to do math with HTML. You will probably never do it unless you need to prove to somebody that you can't do math with HTML because it is completely unfeasible. This is not a dynamic scripting language, but it's possible because we have a way to feed instructions into the machine. It's really easy in CSS. We'll see that Wednesday, I think. But we need this to look better. That's boring, right? Got a bunch of black words, the default color on the link. We can do better even on trivial example. That's why I threw some colors in here. We'll make the header blue, maybe the paragraph red text, and we'll give that link a green background. Something small. 3 things, because there's 3 different ways we can do that. For a long time up till HTML5, there was no standard. There's lots of different ways to do it. And the reason was there was a long running debate. So there's obviously Tobin the inspector. Whenever we make changes, actually I could refer to Microsoft Word because everybody's probably seen it, right? You start changing things in Microsoft Word, you mess everything up. If you need your picture to be just a little bit shorter, you suddenly change something 3 paragraphs below. Everybody's seen stuff like that. So whenever we're applying styles, saying how big things are, sizes, margins, spacing, everything else on that document needs to know about that change. So there was a long running debate from the original creation of HTML up until the HTML5 standard of what's the best way to notify that stuff. So there's 2 ways. You have bubbling. Bubbling is when we start at that element. So if we want to style this paragraph tag, we'd start there and then work up to the top and notify everything along the way that paragraph has a certain style to it. The other side of that debate was cascading, where we start at the top level, and the top level knows that paragraph has a style rule, so it cascades down like a waterfall until it hits that thing. And then the sizing information conveys to the whole page. That been on for so long that machines eventually got big enough that we just do both. We bubble up the information and cascade down the confirmation. So the debate raged for so long that we just finally machines could easily handle both. Machines got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, faster and faster. And finally it's like, okay, there's no need to even try to pick one or the other. We're talking fractions of nanoseconds on some machines to move around a document. It doesn't even have to load different things into RAM. It's working with the data already loaded into the ALU portion of the CPU. So, and there's different ways to do it. One of those popular ways was cascading style sheets. Anybody seen C++? If I click on this paragraph, everybody's had C++, you might remember struct from C++. It's a hack an object. If you haven't had C++, or all we have is data fields. If you had that, then that should look an awful lot like the C++ struct, where all we have is attributes. We don't have any methods. So we've an object. For the others, that thing that I just highlighted is what we're getting ready to look at. So that is what it is. It's a special type of struct, but we don't have to say it's a struct because that's all that's there. So the computer knows that when it receives it. So we have this way to set up style rules. And we actually have three ways to set up style rules. That's why I picked 3 colors for our start here. Let me go back to the board and write some stuff. Stop screen share. And go ahead and erase the plan. That's been up there for a minute. Just keep that in mind. Be worth your time to take 2 or 3 minutes and jot that down. Oh, I meant to come back and compare it. I think we spent more than 20 minutes on the HTML. So cross that off and write what, like 45 minutes there. And then adjust the things. That part's kind of obvious. I was going to do that and then forgot till it was already gone. So maybe we'll do it on the next example. But it doesn't take long. A couple minutes at first and a few seconds afterwards to see how far off you are. And then your next guess gets better. Get a better guess and better guess and better guess. And then before long, you're not even guessing anymore. You're just writing down how long it's going to take you to do something. So CSS follows a very strict rule. So we use what's called a selector or selectors. We will see quite a few. Our book doesn't have all of them, so there's going to be a couple that are, and we see in lecture that don't show up in the book. I might leave some out in the lecture that are mentioned in the book, and there are even more. Right? We can't see everything. We're going to build up a good base. So this is just a word to say what we're selecting on the page. So we're going to choose all of the paragraph elements, or all of the anchor elements, or all of the level 2 heading elements, or the body element, and just apply it everywhere. And we're choosing some HTML element. And then we get a curly brace. And then we list out a bunch of style rules, which are the property. They're already preset. So what property do we want to change? The background color, the foreground color, the height, minimum height, maximum height, the width of it, the font we're using, whatever style rule we're looking at, style particular thing. Any way we have to style it, the color, the size, the position, all that information. We're going to spend most of this semester talking about CSS. It's going to be a lot more talking about CSS than HTML, because HTML is just the tags, and then we're just going to work in examples of see what the default version of the tags are, or where those default properties of a tag can be applied, other than that official one. And then from the property, we get a colon, and then a value for that property, and then a semicolon, and eventually close the curly brace. And if you've seen it before, curly braces, semicolons mean the white space does not matter. We could type it all as one line, adjust indenting however is comfortable for you. Maybe try a few different ways, see what you're most comfortable with. I will be doing it this way. There's some years back, it will just survey many thousand programmers and ask, what's the easiest way to read the curly braces? And the majority said, opening curly brace by the starting keyword, indent everything with the semicolon, ending each line. So one semicolon per line, indent everything, and then the closing curly brace lined up with that keyword back out. I'll be doing that in class, but that is based off just a pure majority when somebody took the time to ask thousands of programmers, what's the easiest way to read the curly braces semicolon? You can try different ones, see what you like. In our text editor, there should be a default way so that it generates, whenever you hit an open curly brace, it'll generate the closing one, and you have control over that part of the templating stuff. But this is the general format for CSS. So the selector, I'm in the curly brace, then list out the properties, and they follow a nice strict naming convention. You'll get very used to that very soon. Colon, and then the value, and then a semicolon. And you can leave the semicolon off the very last line because the computer will know to put a semicolon means end of instruction. So when we hit the end of the last instruction in the block, obviously that's the end of an instruction. The computer can fill in that one, but if you can, I always recommend against that. Just because you can doesn't mean you have to. Because if you come back and add stuff afterwards, it's really easy to forget that semicolon when you add things in afterwards. And then it'll start throwing things off. So that's what our style rules look like, and that's what we'll be looking at mostly this semester. But there's multiple places we can put them. So one place is we could put them in line. So as an attribute, so in the opening tag here, that hyperlink reference, that's called an attribute. It's something about that tag. And they all look like that. They have the name of the attribute equals something in quote marks, equals a string. Spaces are allowed, so that would be perfectly fine. Over the years, I found that kind of throws me off because to separate attributes, we space delimit them. So to get to the next attribute, then we have to have a space. So I always leave the spaces off on each particular attribute, but you can include spaces there, but you have to have spaces between them. And well, before HTML, we had like color attributes with the background forward, but now we have a style attribute. So we say style equals or is assigned, and we're inside of our element, so we don't have to go select an element. Right? This is in that particular anchor element. So it only applies to that particular anchor. It doesn't apply to our other anchor. So maybe it would have been better to put that on that H1 thing, but let's say color. So our default HTML, our default is going to be for text. If we just say color, that refers to text color, the foreground color. Most other places where you would use CSS, we do have a standard here. Other things started using that standard because they didn't have a standard. So like the TK interface package in Python, it's the TTK package. One of the second time they came back and revamped it, there was actually a standard for our style stuff. They didn't have a standard there, so they went ahead and included it. And most of our GUI packages and languages like that. So most of those you would have to say foreground color. But for our color, we can just make that green. It knows some words. We're going to spend a while talking about colors. There's a lot we can do with color. That's called inline. And if there was more than one, maybe weight equal weight folder. I'll go ahead and do it that way. And then it still gets the semicolons because cascading style sheets are a semicolon language. It turns into C++ code in the background. It's just we can leave certain parts off because the browser knows what to do with it. But see how they're still separated. And weight is bolder. For those who haven't seen it before, you might be used to Microsoft, like Microsoft Word, where there's one button that says bold, and you're either bold or not bold. 100 through 900 are our levels of bold. And then in CSS, we also have 3 words. We have bold, bolder, and boldest. So programmers have a lot more versions of bold than you're probably used to from Microsoft Word. So if I save that, we'll see those style rules. I'll reload it here. Notice this anchor tag didn't change. It was on this other page that it was green and bold. Does that show up on the video? Yeah, kind of. On that screen, it doesn't look very green. There's some name colors. There's drawback to name colors. We'll talk about coloring soon. So that's one way we can put it in there. The second way is we can use a style tag. That goes up here in the head section because it's data about our data. What color is it going to be? What fonts it's written in, all of that. And we can use a style tag. Let's do that. And yeah, if you saw what my computer did there, remember not to completely trust your predictive text. I had style and hit tab and it just put a title tag in there. I'm not sure why, but and didn't even put the closing one. So always keep an eye on those things. But a style element, and this is called an embedded style sheet. Which page am I? I'm on the second page. So let's say this time, and inside of there, then we need to do our CSS rules here. So this time, let's select the paragraph style of data, paragraph type of data, then a curly brace, and then we can do some things with that. Let's say max with how long is the sentence? Oh, that's a short sentence. 15%. So gotta be under 15%, and maybe the background dash color is, I make the background color red, so maybe something or I can make the foreground color red. I'll do that in a minute. And that's what our CSS properties look like. Words are fully spelled out with a dash in between. The colon and the semicolon at the end. We'll talk about measurements. There's lots and lots and lots of measurements. Personally, I like to go back to the ones that were invented when the press was invented. EMs, they're very, very useful. We base our size off the data that's off the words being written instead of some arbitrary measurement. Makes it really, really nice and convenient. But we have lots of, we'll talk about those soon. So when I reload that, and see that paragraph, it has to be less, I said it has to be max width, so it cannot be more than 50% of the way across the page. So we start getting some word wrapping, got that tan color in the background. If I make this smaller, we should see that size change. Yeah. So it has to be under 15%. So up until a certain point, it's adapted. The style adapts to the size of the window. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on that too. That's going to be a big deal because we have different ones, right? Our textbook, when is it? Week 5, your homework. I'll be using a Motorola phone and a Lenovo tablet and a Windows PC to grade your homework to make sure because that's going to have to make sure it looks right in every screen. Not about the only ones either. We might look at some on this because you guys have the VR headsets. You have that big curved screen, so that can make things look even different. Might want to do some adjustments for that, which I don't have much practice with that, but figure we should at least talk about it, mention it. We'll have time here. But being adaptive to the screen size, and we don't want our style rules to always be set in place. Or sometimes we do. We only want our style rules to never change when we want them to always be set in place. Usually we want them to adapt to the screen size, to adapt to how they're being viewed. Named colors are a problem there. That's where named colors become a problem because named colors will look different on different machines. you run the same code on a different machine and it'll look different. So that could be a bit problematic, especially if there's like official company colors for the company that hired you to make the web page. You don't want to mess up their color, company colors. They'll still match. So if you have colors that match, like those look okay together. The tan and the green, it'll look slightly different if you go to another machine, but they'll still match. But it won't be, if you can see both screens at the same time, you'll see they don't line up. So that's the second way we can apply the styles. And the third one, the one we'll use most often, is using an external style sheet. So I'm going to create a new file, and this just gets a bunch of HTML code. So I'll select the entire HTML document, and I'm going to say min height 100%. And you will see me type that in just about everything, because if the browser doesn't need 100% of the screen, a lot of times it'll decide it doesn't need the whole screen. So if you have like a blue background and the browser's like, oh, you only need 10% of that height, most of the screen is going to be white. So I'll put that as the first line in almost everything I write, and that's this HTML page takes the entire screen size. And we save it. Every single style sheet in the book, and probably 90% of the ones, if you go look up reference material, are going to be called style.css. Hopefully you realize really quickly that you probably don't want to call your stuff style.css, or you're never going to keep it straight. You're going to have lots and lots of way too many files called style.css. So give them a unique name and just give them that CSS extension. So this is hello world.css. And I usually give it the name with the website. So I don't have the example anymore. Somebody broke in my house and they used my backpack to carry stuff away, and they carried that in my backpack at that time was the flash drive that had the only copy of this thing. They used to have something I showed as an example. What was it? I think 93 pages, had 75 different JavaScript files, had one CSS file. And the CSS file, that's our style rules. That's how we say what all the stuff on the pages look like. So that's our first way to make it look like all those pages belong to the same website. And that was the example I used to use. 90 something, I think 93 or 96, but it's been a few years ago. And somebody sold a flash drive, which had my own backup copy. But all 90 something HTML pages, 75 JavaScript files, and one CSS file for all of them. So the external style sheet will use all the rules. So we don't have to listen to all the rules. So maybe we have a couple other things here. Back to the picture, we want that level 2 heading blue and the paragraph text to be red. So select H2 elements and set the color to blue. Will work for now. And select paragraph elements and set the color to be red. So on those first two we looked at, that's easy to tell where they go, right? Because they're right here in, well, one of them is directly in the element, so obviously it applies to that element. The other one is in this HTML file, so obviously it applies to this HTML document. But for a style sheet, we have to connect to it. And to do that, we use a link attribute. I can skip the predictive text. So there's three things we need. One of them we can omit because CSS is a standard. The other two we have to have, but the one that we can omit is going to show up other places in programming. So you might want to see what it is. So relevance is the first thing that we have to have. This has to be here. What is the relevance of this thing we're linking to? How important is it? Well, in our case, we're going to link to a style sheet. So that's always going to look like that. It's boilerplate code. The second one And attributes can go in any order. The order of attributes does not matter. It's it eventually gets passed to a compiled language before the user sees it. So the machine's pulling binary code and can pull from any bit of those bits. It's not like Python code where we have to be careful about the lines. So your attributes can be in any order. So relevance is a style sheet. Then we have MIME type. This is one I always saw in textbooks and didn't realize till much, much later. Actually just heard somebody refer to that as MIME type. Like I was used to typing type in this tag in the HTML, and I read MIME type, M-I-M-E type, and lots of textbooks, and didn't form those connections till I heard somebody say it. And it was like, oh, makes sense. So MIME type is the server will send information to the computer to let it know what it is. So about these style rules. So what are these style rules? Well, they're in text format / CSS. It's always going to look like that for us. Turn up word right. So that's when you see the word MIME, which is an acronym, so it's all capitalized, it's MIME type. The server tells the computer what type of data, the client what type of data it is, and they'll always look like that. So text / CSS, icon / X icon, icon / ping. There's always two parts to it, but technically we can leave that off because CSS is a standard and that's what it's going to look like in everyone. But I would recommend practicing that because in other places where you need to type MIME types, you might want to be used to type, knowing what a MIME type is. And the other thing is we need to refer to it. So I said there are two ways. So hyperlink reference and source. For our style rules, do we need all the style rules every time? Or in the same order? So look at our 2 pages. So the second style rule on here is H2. So that'll come over to the first page and style that. But our second page doesn't have a level 2 heading. So we don't need all of our style rules every time. Sorry, my mouth's getting really dry. I put some toothache medicine in this morning. It's got me extra thirsty and really could use a beverage. It was making it hard to say that word. But we'll finish here in a few seconds. This is going to be one of the longest days. I want to get through this first example. All the boring stuff and then what we're actually going to be looking at. So look, we're in the first example, HTML and CSS. So we don't need all of our style rules every time. So we want to use a hyperlink reference. That's referred to part of the data, whereas the source is the whole thing every time. Like an image has to be sourced because the second half of a ping file would not be any use for us whatsoever. We need the whole image file. But for style rules, we'll just say where it is. It's in the same folder here. So hello world.css. And then I'm going to go ahead and include that / here because I just do other markup languages require it. Like I said earlier, every time they've tried to update the standard for HTML, all the way back to HTML3, that is the very last thing they abandoned before making the standard official. So usually within a couple days, they finally cross that off the list. Okay, don't need the / on standalone tags because it'll destroy backward compatibility, but eventually it might not. So that links to our style sheet. So I'm going to copy and paste it. A really good, quick way to do that. I mentioned the home and end keys the other day. Make sure you know where those are. And before the days of the mouse, to highlight, we hold shift and use the arrows and up and down. So a good way to highlight stuff is if you put your cursor anywhere in that line and then hit end and hold shift and then home, it'll highlight back to the beginning. And I always do that way because if you hit home again, it toggles back and forth between indents. So go to end first, then shift and home, and it highlights that line to copy and paste. And that's a pretty common thing to do in programming. So you want to use that. Again, that link goes up in the head section because it's data about our data. The word wrap was still on here, so you can see all of that. So put something like that in every single file. Basically, that's the starting point. We're going to see those things in every single thing. I guess the only one we might not see in everything we do is the level 2 heading. Save all. And here we can see those other style rules are still applied. There is an override level. So an external style sheet is looked at first. And we can have multiple external style sheets. So maybe you're doing like your favorite basketball teams and you want to include Purdue. Well, you don't need to go try to figure out what those colors are. You can just link to Purdue's official style, the school's official style sheet, and then pull in those colors and use them. So we can have more than one. And the override order is top to bottom in the file. So we did a second link tag, and a third link tag, and a fourth link tag, all pointing at different style sheets. The fourth one would override anything in the second. So top to bottom order for the overrides. Then embedded style sheets override external. Probably should make sense, right? It's going to look at that one, and whether it's above it or below it, the embedded style is part of the document. So it's going to override any external rules. And then inline will override the other two, which hopefully makes sense because that is inside of that particular element. That's not the style. I highlighted the wrong thing. It's inside of that element. So obviously that's like the last piece the computer would see. So there's that override rule. So generally the external style sheet, which is what we're going to do the most in this class, has all of the general rules. And if you want to highlight something specific for an entire page, apply to the entire web page, just one web page or HTML document would be the technical term for it. It gets an embedded sheet, and then for highlighting just a single element over the other rules, you can add style rules there. And I didn't set this up, so notice how they still apply. So the external style sheet has the red text. So that still applies, and the background color is what gets overridden from the embedded style sheet. So you want to try different things, do overriding, see how it overrides, get used to that. Link back to the other page, and here we can see just the basic style. We don't have the green or the brown background. Those are overrides specific to that other page. Just little highlight or accent features that aren't for the whole site. Our whole site is the blue header and blue heading and red text. But on the other one, we get a little bit of accent. Yes, that looks like Christmas colors. That's probably our longest day in class. I wanted to get all the way through that and the boring part earlier, general background, history, and that's not as interesting as doing stuff. Usually we'll finish about 3 o'clock and then have. All right, that all looked like work. So we need to deploy that to the internet. So I'm gonna jump over to the domain host on the community free. Yeah, this is the one for the class. So I'll go to the file manager. And then in HP docs, I'll just upload that whole folder. Upload folder, that one. Yeah, I don't know why I got an upload failed message. Or why it's like stuck there at the end. Looks like both pages made it up, so I don't know what that message was, but I had a feeling it had to do with that floating point number. It's gonna be a few more, 7 or 8 more digits before it got to all nines. So those are there. Let's see if it updated this time. Sometimes it updates really, really quick. So open the page. So there's the main domain. So this would be a good spot to put a table of contents. Then from there, uploaded a hello-world file. Oh, the style sheet didn't upload. That must have been where that was. So there's index and other page. Not sure what happened, but I can upload that single file. Yeah, this is a free one, and they do have a paid for account. So there's little things like that sometimes. There's a limit on how much we can upload at once. That happens if you have a really big site. Now with those style rules there. Our links work. Oh, there it is. So it's not applying the style rules. Maybe you can't find it. Let me go to the inspector panel. Failed to load resource, the server responded status of 404. What's permissions on this? Has read permissions. Should be there. I think it's just delayed finding it. And notice there's like little links down here in the console, so we can go over here and see right where the problem is. View page source, link right to it. Okay, so apparently the domain host is having trouble finding it. Once it finds it, it should be there, but it's probably like the other day. It just needs to it'll be a while. It happens differently. So if anybody were following along, they might have been uploading to the same server on that server farm at the same time. We uploaded our files at the same time, and then it got stuck because we're on the free accounts with the minimized bandwidth and all that. I can right click and go to edit, and I see the file successfully uploaded. So I know it's there. So it should work eventually, but I guess we have to wait on the server to refresh before we'll actually be able to see it. But we don't need to sit there and do that unless I finish out the example, which I guess is another common thing for the example. Once we move it to the internet, that machine is beyond our control. We might have to wait for a refresh. If you're on AWS and actually managing the server, then you can go in there and schedule a refresh. And go type sudo restart Apache 2 or Apache 1, whichever one you use it. But since we're not the ones doing that on the server, we don't have here. I think we just have to wait for it. But that's the general idea of what we're going to do for the stuff on the class. Anybody have any questions about that? And the examples will get quite a bit faster. We will see a whole lot of styling rules. We're going to spend a lot of time on that. And usually people are very excited in this class about how quickly we can make some really, really good looking stuff. Any questions for today's stuff? Okay, I assume 5 seconds of silence means no questions. I'll make sure there's none in the chat room. That might have been a different issue. I'll talk about that in a minute, Jamie, if you want to hang out. Otherwise, that'll be it for today. If you want to stick around for a minute, Orlando, we'll take a look at that. I had a question in the chat room. Otherwise, I will see you all on Wednesday and we'll just, for examples, and be a much shorter class. Y'all have a good one.